Hi there, it's Marcus here. I'm going to talk to you again about yearning, the future sense of yearning, ways of accessing it, starting to think about it. And of course, for me, this is actually also a thinking process and a doing process. It's a practice. I've been afflicted by yearning all my life. I've often wondered whether there's something wrong with me, actually. It makes me restless, it makes me curious. It makes me fond of experience, aesthetic experience. I have a lovely cup of coffee and one of my favourite yellows. I fall in love with things so easily. And I don't fall out of love with them. It's not sort of like love-hate in that kind of romantic sense. But everything seems to have a kind of sheen, a shimmer of meaning to it, a shimmer of rightness, you might say. Sometimes even wrongness comes across as rightness in actual fact. Yearning is something I think that we push aside because it is difficult. It's a difficult emotion. It's a difficult approach to living at some level because we are so conditioned to managing. Managing is toxin when it comes to yearning. It really does strike at the very heart of yearning. There's no management in the world outside that window. There's the plants grow. They, in a sense, yearn for the sunlight. They reach up, like one of Leonora Oppenheim's motions. They reach up to the sky. They are in love with light. Of course, light is sustaining and so on. We can give it much more scientific and practical descriptions, but there's something else happening there. It's the relationship of the living thing with the source of life, which in the plant world, of course, is nearly always the sun, unless it's some kind of non-plant fungi or something like that, which also does its own thing. Or you can probably hear that bird outside my window. It's calling. What is it calling for? Is it signaling? Is it just celebrating joy? Do you ever sing? If you sing, does it make your heart swell? Does it make your whole sense of being expand in some way? This is one of the reasons why many years ago, particularly, I used to do a lot of kirtan. I still do kirtan. It's a beautiful introduction to yearning. Kirtan is a Sanskrit word. Essentially, it means sacred song, you might say. But it's built around mantra and so on, and it's ideative. It ticks over and over again, so that it is the process, the little machine, the engine in our head and our heart and our body that generates what I would call a futures pheromone, a yearning pheromone. It generates, in my tradition, or my spiritual tradition, it generates love. So that's me confessing right now that I'm yearning, and I always am yearning. And perhaps you are too. And that's what I would like you to think about a lot in the light of this lecture. So I'm going to keep sipping away at my coffee, of course, and I'm going to leap into the lecture by sharing the screen like that and offering you the images that I've used here. I've put a lot of thought into the images this time. Well, I always put thought into it, but this time I've even put more thought. Yearning. Yearning is something that often we do in solitude, or finds its, we can access it perhaps when we're in solitude, like this young woman looking out over water at sunrise or sunset. I don't know which. So here we go. Yearning, as I've kind of suggested already, is mysterious. How do we think about yearning? In the West, now think modernity, Yearning is usually linked to material wants. However, as I was touching on with my mentioning of kirtan, in mystical cultures around the world, yearning is what Prabharanjan Sarkar, my hero, yes, calls longing for the great. My first encounter with that term was 35, 40 years ago nearly, and it has stayed with me, this longing for the great. It gave me a way of understanding this kind of restless yearning that is at the heart of my being. So I want you to think about that. For you, what is the great? If you were in a very religious tradition, you would say it's longing for God. But it might be longing for expansion so that we merge with the cosmos. We merge with light, or we merge with darkness, or with water. We merge with life. But I want to touch on these mystical traditions because they have framed much of my thinking, because as a young lad I went off to university and immersed myself in reading Christian mysticism, particularly looking at its role throughout the medieval period in Europe, looking at key mystics, and then looking at the mechanisms by which mystics tried to explain what they were longing for, what they were yearning for, and also what it did to their ability to understand the world. Some of this is written about in some of my papers on neo-humanism, where I talk about the humanists, particularly one, Sebastian Castellio, for whom I'm eternally grateful for meeting, who was a early 16th century reformer who really annoyed people like Calvin because he said, we cannot know. Again, one of those guys from that period who said we cannot know. And he talked about the art of doubt. And the Arte Dubitandi is the name of one of his most famous books. And I used that book as the basis for my honours thesis. When I was a wee lad, I was reading it when I was 20 and 21, finished writing it just before I turned 21. Pretty awesome, really. So, let's look at these mystical traditions just a little bit to give you a taste. So I'm going to start off with the Christian tradition and the Bible. In Psalm 42 in the Bible, a beautiful set of songs, spiritual songs, we have the following. As the deer longs for the water brooks, so longs my soul for you, O God. My soul is athirst for God, athirst for the living God. We long. The Bible, the biblical mystics, not the biblical lawgivers, they didn't get mysticism, they didn't get this kind of yearning. They were more into social rules for how to identify myself as a Jewish person, as a follower of the Jewish God Yahweh, for instance. No, but once you get into the mystics, and the mystics are always hated by fundamentalists because they muddy the waters. They don't see black and white. They see glory and wonder and magic everywhere. This is why the Shiites and Sunnis hate the Sufis, for instance. They get a bad time and a bad rap. But let's move on to one of my other real favourites. Rabindranath Tagore, a Bengali Indian nationalist, died 1947, was a friend of Mahatma Gandhi and people like that, was a great artist, intellectual, and great spirit. And he was, in the early 20th century, he was touched by a call to write poetry, and he wrote the most glorious poetry in Bengali. This is a translation. And it was all about yearning, this poetry. It's called the Gitanjali. That's the name of the book. It won him the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1915. And that in itself is a landmark because he was the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize in any category. So, he says this, on the day when the lotus bloomed, alas, my mind was straying, and I knew it not. My basket, in other words my mind, was empty and the flower remained unheeded. That vague sweetness made my heart ache with longing, and it seemed to me that it was the eager breath of the summer seeking for its completion. I knew not then that it was so near, that it was mine, and that this perfect sweetness had blossomed in the depth of my own heart. So, encountering the Gitanjali when I was 26 or something like that was just breathtaking. It just blew my mind. It gave me another entire vehicle for understanding this yearning and acknowledging my own yearning, because my yearning gets expressed often through the poetic, through the beautiful. The lotus is a metaphor for the mind. It's also a metaphor for the divine seat. This is where in yogic philosophy, the guru, the divine blessed being, sits and pours out grace onto the world. But the metaphors used in much of Tagore's work, classic Bengali metaphors. Bengal is a very articulate culture, actually. It's a very much in love with its own language, its own traditions, and nature for the Bengali culture is a vehicle for expressing longing, beauty, gratitude, grace, and of course the sacred. So we find here the mind missing the lotus, not seeing the lotus, and then the mind slowly but surely becoming aware that this lotus is blossoming within our own very consciousness. Well, where do we go with that? Well, let me leap across to the Celts and Celtic Christianity, which is the most deliciously pagan Christianity you can probably find. I love paradox. John O'Donoghue, one of my favourite guys, he died in his early 50s actually, quite suddenly and quite surprisingly. But he gave us his beautiful, rich corpus of work. The Anam Cara, okay, the spiritual wisdom of the Celtic world, is his major work. And in it he said the following: we are haunted with a deep sense of absence. There is something missing from our lives. We always expect it to be filled by a definite person, or object, or project. We are desperate to fill this emptiness, but the soul tells us, if we listen to it, that this absence can never be filled. If we listen. Much of what I was talking about in lecture 11 about yearning is to do with this, if we listen. Where do we go from that? Well, let's go to a non-Christian, secular, you might say, but very much in touch with the sacred at another level. Let's go to Kay Tempest. I've cited Kay Tempest before. She's non-binary. Much of her publications are still cited as Kate Tempest, but she dropped the T some years ago from her name. And she writes the most glorious, thoughtful, and for me, transformative poetry too. So here she is reflecting on simplicity itself. Some things are as simple as they seem. It's as much about instinct as it is about intellect, feeling and thinking. And if we feel it, it's alive. Let it be magic. These are not engines we're making. Wherever you come from is a holy place. Do not love the idea of life more than you love life itself. The world is a terrible place for sensitive people. But the closer we come to losing our minds, the harder we work to keep them. If you are not fighting for it, that's keeping your mind, or losing it, one or the other, you don't want it. So there's some really interesting paradoxical things going on here. But I think this idea that we're not making engines, that if you feel it, it's alive. Oh, such an insight. That's why I put the butterfly there. Photo I took myself. Let it be magic, she says. These are not engines. where we come from is a holy place. And I would say where we're going to is also a holy place. In fact, we need to generate holy places around us. So, let's think about this now. Let's take it personally. When did you, that's you there, when did you first experience yearning? Was it for a material object or something intangible? If you achieved the object of your desire, were you satisfied? Perhaps it spawned new desires. Think about the words yearning, wanting, desiring, needing. Are they the same? This is really important to think about. The way words perhaps corral our thinking. Maybe we use words in a very lazy way. One of the good things about philosophy is it makes us reflect on our own language and the associations those words that constitute language carry. Languages are not all the same, of course. There are different, you could say different aromas or fragrances that come from different languages, which I am particularly fond of. Again, part of that yearning for me, that sense-making. Well, let me tell you a short story about my own experience of yearning. It's to do with Christmas. We did Christmas in a big way in my childhood. In fact, my family have been very fond of the beautifully arranged Christmas tree with the most exquisitely packaged presents that sit under the Christmas tree. And my childhood, there's this Christmas tree and there was this flood of these most beautiful packages, just like you see here. Okay? The excitement, the sense of anticipation, which is part of yearning, of course, was huge in the family. And Christmas morning we'd get up and we'd sit around the Christmas tree and wait for the ceremony of Mum and Dad to pass out the presents. Oh, this one's for you, Marcus. This one's for you, one of my sisters, and so on. And, of course, husband and wife giving themselves presents. And there were lots of them. We'd get, 5, 10, 15 presents. It was ridiculous. We'd have a stocking, everything. My parents really went overboard. And, of course, my father, being a graphic designer and artist, was the most exquisite, skillful packager. He could wrap things and make them look as though they come straight out of, the most prestigious shop, Harrods in London or somewhere like that. It was really quite a show. But you know what? And I became aware of this very young, 8, 9 years of age, or perhaps even younger. But that's when I first started really feeling the post-Christmas ache. There was an anticlimax to it. There was no, because my parents were not practicing Christians in any way at this time, there was no, subtle, intangible element to Christmas. It was all about things. Of course, it was about things and saying, I really love you, my child, by giving you lots of presents. I still have books on my bookshelf that were given to me by my parents at this time. I treasure them because each one's handwritten in it to Marcus, dear love, Mummy and Daddy, 1966 or something like that. And it's really very sweet. But I was left with this serious emptiness afterwards. And I became increasingly aware of it, of course, as I got older and became more conscious or self-conscious of what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? Am I greedy? Is it that I'm not satisfied with the presents? Are they not good enough or something? And of course, I realized that they were good enough, that they were expressions of parental love and so forth. But, there was this emptiness. And what is that? I'm not sure. But I want you to think about perhaps times when you felt that anticlimax. There's many things that could be said about it. And I think we have to understand yearning through our biographies, the stories we tell ourselves, in other words. How do we experience that? There's much more to that, of course. As I say in the previous lecture, yearning happens at a species level as well. But let's keep moving. So there's an exercise I'm inviting you to do. So let's look at those words that I listed off before: yearning and wanting, desiring and needing. I'd like you to run off, or perhaps just draw it by hand in an exercise book or something, a table like this. And I want you to write down words you associate with yearning. Notice I left yearning blank. But, what do you want? Oh, I'd like an ice cream or a coffee or whatever. What do you desire? Oh, I desire a nice car. I want to be promoted, or, a beautiful boyfriend or girlfriend, or, a child, or whatever, a trip overseas, and so on. What do you need? Well, we need certain things. We need food, of course, we need security, and so on. And these are categories, of course, that I want you to think about. How we respond to those categories, of course, varies. But I would like you to perhaps spend some time filling out a table like this, okay? And then we're going to do the following. We're going to take a leaf out of Leonora Oppenheim's session. I want to thank all of those of you who showed up for that session. It was brilliant. And we can use colour to categorise these words. You can put red around words that stand out, or maybe make you angry or fearful. Your own relationship with colour, of course, is going to be personal. You saw me waving my yellow cup around before. Yellow is always, this kind of yellow is a colour that I associate with joy, for instance. So we can also put them into sentences, like Leonora said. So you might go back and you say, ice cream, nice cars and food make the world go round. So what are you going to do with a sentence like that? Okay, we can put them into sentences. You can find and draw images that represent them. We can associate emotions with them. How do I feel? You could do the exercise that Leonora walked us through, putting the words onto pieces of paper, putting graphical little images to go with it, putting the paper down and coming up with movements that we associate with those words, and so forth. Those of you who were in Leonora's session know very well what I'm talking about. If you weren't there, it's not that hard, actually. You can use colour to categorise the words. You can put words into sentences. You can play with them. You can see how does it feel if you've got a list of 5 words under wanting, ice cream, curry, the rain to stop, those sorts of things. You can try putting one of those words with nice car. And then you need food, you need security, you need meaning, you need happiness maybe. These are things that you might put there, but you might have, I want meaning in life. I really want it. Or I yearn for it. It might go over here. I'm just playing now, aren't I? And of course, that's what you need to do, because there is no right or wrong in this. Treat it as a yearning exercise, a reflective exercise. Here's another exercise for you. You know that I'm addicted to music. I can't help myself. Can you think of a yearning song, your yearning song? Is there one perhaps that is your go-to every single time? For my mother, it was this beautiful piece of music for the guitar called the Cavatina, which was the theme for the Deer Hunter movie long ago. I've been playing it for 40 years or more. It would always make my mum cry. And I'm serious. It was a profoundly intimate song for her. It's a profoundly beautiful piece. And it does express yearning. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And there's many things I could say about a piece like that. But I'm not going to talk about the aesthetics of yearning at this point. Maybe in a later session. Perhaps you have songs for different yearning occasions. Think about me talking about yearning zones. There's famous old Scottish song, Auld Lang Syne. Da 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 da. Okay, that it speaks to a kind of nostalgia, a sentiment for times gone. I saw the original version of this poem written up by Robbie Burns himself in a pub when I was in Scotland 50 more years ago now. And it struck me because, it was in the handwriting of somebody who, in Australian sort of Anglo culture, Robbie Burns is very famous. And of course the song, even then when I was 15 or so, was famous. So that's a certain kind of nostalgic yearning. And of course, it's sung at the end of the year. So we're looking back at the year, the great and the bad, the things that have happened. Dun, 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 dun. I can hear it so clearly in my head. And of course, there are links here all the time. Or, let's think about it. Is it the melody? Dun, 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 dun. Or is it the words? Half of us probably don't know the words properly because the words are in a Gaelic English dialect that was spoken in Scotland in the mid-18th century. So it might not be the words, but it could be, in your sense of your yearning song, the words. Or is it something like, the first time ever I saw your face? You know, it's an absolutely stupendous song in my world, because the first time I could say that I heard that song, it really touched my soul. It touched my spirit, because it is that face. What is the face? Is it the face of your future husband or wife or child? Or is it that the face represents that mystical yearning that I was touching on in those short extracts from poetry at the beginning of this lecture? I think it's something else. I think the face in this particular case is the sacred in some respects. And of course, beauty and love of a person who really means something to you, of course, that is important too. But that person, as all people are actually messages in bottles to us, to wake us up, to challenge us, or whatever it might be. Perhaps then the association is also linked to where you were when you first heard that song. So I immediately talked about Auld Lang Syne and said, there I was in Scotland, 1974, standing in a Scottish pub, probably with a reasonably mild beer in my hand, because I was only 15 or so at the time, and going, oh my God, look at that. This is Robbie Burns' personal pub. He used to come here all the time after work and on the farm or whatever. So, you know, it might be that the first time you heard the song was in some place. I have so many on my list. I can tell much of my life through music. Oh, the guitar pieces I play, how they take me to places all over the world, times, frames and so on. So for me, songs are a great way of thinking about yearning, but it might be, in your case also, yearning movies, yearning TV shows, yearning family occasions, and so on. It can be many places. You need to start thinking about where do you anchor your own yearning. So completing that yearning story about, the link of, yearning to music, of course, brings in dance. Here's one of my great heroes, Leonard Cohen. Leonard Cohen singing Dance Me to the End of Love, which is a song about yearning, dripping with yearning. If you listen to the words, if you don't know the song, listen to the words and listen to the way the melody and the words entwine. Or, no words at all, Elgar's fabulous and Nimrod variation in the Enigma Variations, number 9. So they're both links. You can just click on the images there and that you'll be taken directly to those music. So to me, there is something about yearning to do with dance and movement. It moves us into the world. So where do we go with it now? Well, let's have a look at some exercises. Deep listening. I touched on that last lecture. It's absolutely fundamental. In my world, deep listening is soulful. I meditate, which is obviously a form of deep listening. But we can deep listen in many, many different ways. Okay. Close my window. Someone started mowing. So deep listening. It can be cultivated, of course. Everything in the future senses work is to be cultivated. It is all action-based, verbal. When did you last stand in a forest or watch the moon rise or set? Start to find places and processes and ways to generate yearning, places where you feel your soul come to life or tickle some deep down feeling inside you that you possibly can't even articulate. Keep a diary or journal to keep track of this process. This is something we were talking about on Tuesday. I think it's a fantastic tool for deep listening, for reflection. And I'm really hoping that some of you will take that work into your own practice. the diary practice, yearning and diary work. Can you create a ritual, perhaps burning a candle in an empty room, listening to your own breath or a bird song? There is something about, let's say, light. Candles are in churches, synagogues, all sorts of sacred places, Hindu temples, Buddhist temples and so on. There's something about candlelight. It really does bring in its own enchantment, its own magic. Start thinking about ritual and how you might link some simple practices in your own life with that. So of course, talking about journals, and deep listening, I need to touch more directly on the work of Warren Ziegler, whom I've already touched on in the previous lecture. Here are 2 quotes from his book. Inspiriting is the act of listening to the voice of your spirit in its many manifestations. That's why I talk about yearning songs or yearning practices and so on, yearning zones. It manifests in many ways. One of the tricks of the trade in inspiriting is to learn how to enter the space for spirit as a commonplace human activity whenever it is wanted or needed. Using a journal, there it is, helps open that space when you are ready to jot down your moments of insight as they come to you. So let's activate things a bit more. Deep listening helps us get in touch with this sense, the future sense of yearning. Recognizing that this sense adds direction and energy to our lives is key. If we can understand how our yearning is expressed, which is why, of course, Warren Ziegler offers us 9 archetypes, inspiriting or spirit archetypes, or I could call them yearning archetypes. We yearn to heal the world, to love the world, to organize the world, and so on. Each zone of yearning understands yearning differently. That, I hope, makes total sense. As we seek to generate alternative futures, we can understand yearning as a conscious calling into the world. Yearning as calling. That's why in the little lecture that I shared with you for the Gender Agenda conference that I'm part of, I have a whole list about calling. I didn't want to talk about yearning. I thought it might be a bit much with no context, so I called it calling. What calls people to be at this conference? What calls you guys to be listening to this lecture, for instance? So it is a kind of conscious calling into the world. Cultural production, how we produce and make culture, is a response to yearning. How we've created our social forms. Why do we have to build major palaces for kings or sacred sites like cathedrals or whatever? Yearning, of course, I say of course, we need to talk about it a bit more, has pheromonal properties. Yearning emits pheromones that draw us into the world. Just like a pheromone will attract us or repel us. So pheromones are at work in our cultural context as well, but of course I'm speaking metaphorically at some level. They're not chemical pheromones, or are they? Perhaps they are. Because if I'm fearful, I'm emitting fearful pheromones through the actual sweat glands on my skin and everything. So let's think about pheromones. Yearning for what? What are you yearning for? What I have to ask myself, I'm always asking myself, what am I yearning for? We are back at the start again of this lecture. Futures work seeks to trigger awareness of our yearning. The pull of the future can be understood this way, and that's why I have the futures triangle here. It talks about the pull of the future. A very simple, clear, elegant tool for thinking about possible futures. So, all futures tools, I would argue, and I've said this before in earlier lectures, can be shaped to make yearning more tangible or to make any of the future senses more tangible. Try it out on your favourite tool. If you've got a favourite tool, have a crack at seeing how do you, or would you, if you were running an exercise with a group of people, how would you weave yearning into that? Link it to your life. We've got to make yearning personal. It is personal. But understand that species yearn too. It is, in fact, a key element of consciousness. Okay, I would argue, and I have in different places, that it's a key element in evolution itself. Remember that the proton yearns for the electron. So let's look at how do we approach yearning. Well, yearning works across scales, from the species, the planetary, the cosmic, all the way down to you and I, and those protons and electrons as well. So we need to find things like yearning stories. We need to locate yearning spaces, identify yearning zones, yearning calls. What is it? How is it? Are we called? And that's where the spirit calls from Warren Ziegler's work comes in. It's such a useful tool. Yearning dances and movements, the kind of work that Leonora Oppenheim does. There are learning frequencies, subtle vibrational yearnings that are emitted in our cultural world and expressed through social media, but also through conversations and through the kind of images of the future and images of self that we are receiving all the time. I would say and invite you to link yearning to your own understanding of your own secret garden, that sacred special place inside us that we need to nurture and care for. Pay attention to and respect this guiding principle of yearning. We need to respect it. We need to actually have gratitude, because yearning brings such richness to life, even though it might also bring restlessness. I can certainly speak for that one myself. So, talking in my own voice now, because this article on mushroom, I Am Mushroom, is coming out in the next month, or even possibly by next week, I'm not sure. My mushroom self yearns and releases pheromonal signals that tap into collective yearnings. Notice I can link the individual with the collective. To explicitly work with this sense brings futures work into focus. Gives me and you a sense of why we're doing this futures work. It enables me to sharpen the other senses of memory and foresight, voice, and optimism. It enables also the post-humanist project by supplying the needed energy to break free from the epistemological gravity that holds us stuck in unyielding structures that no longer serve the collective project of transformation. Post-humanism is an approach to the humanist affirmation that human beings are of equal value, you might say, and that the humanities, the study of being human, is valid. The post-humanists point out that we have left out of that equation, excluded, cut it off, denied nature, the natural, and the whole process of the whole cosmic process that sits at a much deeper level, at my mushroom level, I would say, of being and being aware, self-conscious. So I would suggest or recommend that you start thinking about developing a yearning sanctuary. Of course, that would start off with your own secret garden. That is your core yearning sanctuary. It's within you. It is totally secure as long as you guard the gate, right? You don't want to let fear, hatred, negativity into your garden. It is a sacred place. So I believe that yearning is a spiritual practice. I think I've made that clear across this. There is something at the core of mysticism about this yearning. It is something that we do. I would say we do, but the context determines how we express it. So if you're a materialist and you only yearn for material affirmation, you're going to want more money, bigger houses, faster cars, or more glamour, It brings energy, yearning does, and also a stillness to our emotion. This stillness releases its own magic. It is stillness in motion. There's a paradox there. Love is key, as I pointed out. It is the positive energy that shapes how we understand and express yearning. I would argue love is a self-organizing principle. Our hearts need to become a yearning sanctuary in which we can nurture the kind of love that we feel called to express. Again, going back to Warren Ziegler with his archetypes, his spirit archetypes. He's not saying that they're a complete list. They're just the way he has defined his experience of the different kinds of yearnings that he's met over 40-odd years of his work with people and groups. At the heart of that, we express love in different ways. But love itself brings about an order to the world. It is relational at its very core. But it's not love as in desire to possess, control, manipulate and manage. Of course, that's toxic and it's not really love at all. It's the distortion of an emotion of love and care in a world in which we don't understand and we don't care for our own sacred space, our own yearning sanctuary, secret garden, call it what you will. So, as a practice then, you might also want to build a yearning sanctuary in your own home or neighbourhood. I have spaces outside under the trees where I have sculptures and things placed. But this one here, this is about 20 kilometres from me in the middle of a rainforest. It was built by the artist Andy Goldsworthy, and it's a place that I visit every year or so. And it's a pilgrimage to visit this. It's about 5 kilometres into the rainforest, down muddy tracks through different forms of forest and rainforest and so on. It's a fantastic site, but it is a sacred site. Okay, it is called the Strangler Fig Cairn, if you're wanting to go and find more about it. So, I would recommend, and I'll say it again, think about building a yearning sanctuary. It might be a little corner in your house where you just go and sit quietly and light a candle. Or find yearning sanctuaries in your travels and identify them. I can say that there are multiple, this place here for instance, where the Strangler Fig Cairn is. These are sites that I go to when I need sanctuary, you might say. Build a list, add them, this list of places, to a growing list of sites that offer yearning possibilities. Feed and nurture this awareness. So this is the job of yearning. I feel like I've only just scratched the surface, and yet really it's the possibilities that I've already touched on here are rich, meaningful, deep, and in fact endless. And that of course is part of the yearning journey, is that it's an endless growth, expansion, exploration of heart and consciousness, mind and meaning and so on. Because once we achieve one yearning, bring it into focus a little bit, there are other yearnings that ripple out from it. That's the key, and that's why it's so important. There are a few references there for you to consider. Wow, I hope that was useful. Look forward to discussing it. I think we have a number of sessions that we need to dedicate to this question of yearning and yearning practices. So also remember that our sessions are only on Tuesdays now, and I look forward to seeing as many as possible at our next Tuesday. And drop me a line if you have yearning questions. Okay, thank you so much and take care. Yours in yearning, I might say.